Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
The BLM is back in the news again. This time we hear from a sheriff in Utah who said he'll deputize the entire county, every man, woman, and child if he has to, in order to defend the land rights of local citizens from an occupying federal army. You hear the phrase posse comitatus. And typically we think of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is an act that limits the power of the federal government to use the federal military to enact domestic policy. Think about that. We don't want a military coming into our communities. We don't want soldiers. We don't want martial law. Okay, that's why we have the Posse Comitatus Act. But what does Posse Comitatus really mean? It literally means the power of the county. The sheriff of the county would call a posse. We've all seen the Westerns, right? You have the sheriff who was elected, not appointed by some kind of law enforcement bureaucracy, not appointed by some distant federal government that is as far distant geographically as the British government was geographically from the American colonies at the time of the Revolutionary War. So law enforcement was centered around one elected official and some of his permanent deputies. But when something big would happen, they would deputize people and they would create a posse to keep the peace in the county.
We're not taking no more cats on the mountain. I'll deputize every man, woman, and child in that county to stop what's going on.
So how did we get to the situation where the federal government is bullying local citizens to the point where a sheriff has to threaten to deputize the entire county? As a recent article from High County News has pointed out, this is a result of an arms race by the BLM, an arms race on the range. Until 1978, there were no badged BLM agents. At first, there were only 13. They modeled themselves after Park Service Rangers and carried only pistols. 2 years earlier, there had been a Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976 that granted law enforcement authority to the agency. But it also emphasized that they rely upon local law enforcement. And at first, they cooperated with county sheriffs. But within just a few years, they were seeing heavily armed agents. Chris Hartman, who was hired as a ranger in 1984, recalls a series of controversial equipment upgrades: shotguns in the 80s, semi-automatic rifles in 1992, high-powered assault rifles in the early 2000s. Then she left the BLM for the Forest Service, and she saw the same pattern happening there. But she said, still, the sheriffs were ahead of us in terms of weaponry. Is this some kind of an arms race between local law enforcement and federal agents?
In 1996 alone, at least 2,439 new federal cops were authorized to carry firearms. That takes the total up to nearly 60,000. Farah points out that these cops were not only in agencies like the FBI, but include the EPA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps of Engineers. Even Bruce Babbitt, according to Farah, wants to arm the Bureau of Land Management. Farah logically asks, when will the NEA have its armed art cops?
We have to understand that whenever the federal government starts arming itself with high-powered military equipment, they are turning themselves into a standing army, and they will use this against the citizens. As elsewhere in law enforcement, 9/11 changed things. It created a restructuring. Former BLM director Bob Abbey said it created a faction within the agency. And he said, I think in many respects they have become a separate organization. So-called special agents in charge were given autonomy over large regions. The most controversial of these special agents has been Dan Love, special agent for Utah and Nevada. He was a special agent in charge at the Bundy standoff, but he was controversial long before that. His first controversy involved illegal artifact trading in southeast Utah, going back to 2009. In that case, a doctor who was very beloved to the small community that he served was accused of taking an Indian artifact from the land that the federal government claims belongs to them. The item in question was a bead, less than half the size of a dime. The wrongful death complaint by the doctor's family said the BLM agent Love had doubled the value of the item so the charge would rise to that of a felony. And they also said this was retaliation for dismissal of similar charges more than a decade earlier. In Utah, the doctor had been accused by a confidential federal informant. The 60-year-old doctor was swarmed by between 80 and 100 agents in full military array, flak jackets, assault weapons. He was manhandled, handcuffed as he returned home from serving in the community health clinic that he ran. He was taken to his garage, interrogated for 4 hours like a terrorist. He was told that he would lose his medical license, and Agent Love accused him of using garden tools to dig up bodies. The doctor was so distraught by these charges that he committed suicide. The family brought a wrongful death lawsuit against the BLM. The BLM argued that agents have qualified immunity, and a judge eventually dismissed the case, saying the agent's mere presence and proximity to Dr. Red did not create an excessive show of force, even if the agents wore SWAT gear and carried, but did not point, machine guns. Yet the basis for the charges against Cliven Bundy regarding the Bunkerville standoff are that he incited people to carry firearms legally, and that the brandishing of firearms alone was a felony threat to federal officers. So what we have here are a set of two different rules. One set for protesters, a completely different set for federal officers. The hallmark of tyranny. But as we're reminded with the recent indictment of Cliven Bundy, special agent in charge, Dan Love, was the center of the Bunkerville standoff. Now even the Clark County Sheriff, Doug Gillespie, friend of Harry Reid, said in interviews with Las Vegas newspapers at the beginning of February that the BLM had lied to him about circumstances of the cattle roundup. Another BLM special agent in charge, Steve Martin, who serves in a different jurisdiction, recalls sitting in the briefing room of Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, listening to the details of a clandestine operation that his agency was planning in the Nevada desert, which would eventually become the Cliven Bundy cattle operation. He characterized the plan as unduly optimistic bravado. And he said, "I remember thinking, is this still the BLM?" He said, "We know there are a lot of people out there who don't like us." And he believes things would not have come to the kind of head that they did if the BLM had worked with and through the local sheriff instead of lying to him about what was going on. But they didn't. They acted confrontationally, high-handed. And now, after 2 years, they have made good on their vendetta and arrested Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy. Garfield County Sheriff Danny Perkins has said, "We have absolutely no relationship with the BLM. We've tried. They seem to want to do their own things. They do not respect the authority of the sheriff at all." Another county sheriff, Rick Eldridge, says that rangers pull over citizens without probable cause, even in areas where they have no jurisdiction. They bully ranch hands. They berate tourists for parking vehicles off dirt roads. And they illegally close roads. Federal officers refuse to help with search and rescue. When they do, they get in the way, he says. So this is what brings us to the point where Piute County Sheriff Marty Gleave says, "We're not taking it anymore. I'll deputize every man, woman, and child in the county to stop what's going on."
I'll deputize every man, woman, and child in that county to stop what's going on.
For Infowars.com, I'm David Knight.
I want more candy. I want more video games. Lie.
And it's that type of behavior that spurred me to do the research to develop a true nutraceutical formula that was designed to smooth out and help children focus. All of our children are hit with modern mind control. Television, music, fast food, GMOs, sugars, you name it. Young humans have not yet developed their nervous system and are being hammered daily by globalist concoctions. It's no wonder they can't focus and calm down and then are put on dangerous psychotropic drugs. Working with my team, we set out to find the best formula with the highest quality ingredients that children would actually like and take. We worked with the leading manufacturer in nutritional supplements that are safe for children to bring you the most affordable and powerful calming formula out there. Introducing Child Ease with herbs and calming extracts like chamomile and lemon balm and essential nutrients that taste great. Obtain your Child Ease today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's Child Ease exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com.